Who raised you more, your parents, your grandparents, or someone else?
While I was stuck in bed with stitches still fresh and pain meds making my head feel like it was wrapped in cotton, my parents were already checked into a five-star resort in Mexico, sipping watered-down margaritas by the pool with my sister, and when I called them, naively thinking they'd just forgotten to say goodbye, they answered with fake cheer and said, "Oh, honey, don't worry about us. You would have just slowed us down." Slowed them down. That's what they said. As if I were an overstuffed suitcase instead of their daughter recovering from abdominal surgery. I hung up the phone, stared at the ceiling fan circling above me like it was waiting for something to fall apart, and in that exact moment, something inside me did. This wasn't the first time they had chosen Amanda over me. And I know every sibling says that, but I don't mean in that bratty, childish way. I mean systematically. Repeatedly. And with the kind of carelessness that only comes from long-term conditioning. I was the older one, the quiet one, the one who didn't need much, as my mother used to say with a little smile that was always 2 degrees too cold to feel like love. Amanda was the sparkler, the performer, the one with the hair that curled naturally into perfect golden waves and a voice that could melt any adult within 10 seconds of conversation. When we were kids, she was the one getting balloons tied to her wrist at the fair while I was the one holding the purse and waiting by the gate. I didn't fight it back then. I told myself that being invisible was easier than being a disappointment. The day of the surgery, I had asked them to be there. Just to sit in the waiting room, maybe hold my hand for a bit when I came out of anesthesia. Nothing dramatic. Just family. They agreed. Or at least, they didn't disagree. Mom nodded vaguely while scrolling through her iPad, and Dad muttered something about needing to check his calendar. I should have known then. Should have asked better questions. Should have realized the way they said, "of course," was already a lie, soft and sugar-coated, meant to keep me from pushing back. But when I woke up alone, sore and dazed, with a nurse telling me no one's here but your friend Kara's on her way, the realization hit me like a gut punch that had nothing to do with the incision across my abdomen. Later that day, I got the message, landed safe. Resort is stunning. Wi-Fi spotty, but we'll check in when we can. Don't worry, you'll be fine. Love, Mom. Attached was a blurry photo of Amanda holding a mimosa, sunglasses pushed up on her head like some damn Instagram model, standing next to a cabana that cost more than my rent. No mention of my surgery. No questions about how I felt. Just sun, smiles, and me completely erased from the family narrative like I'd never existed. I lay there in my one-bedroom apartment, the walls too white and the room too quiet, feeling like someone had cracked my chest open and scooped out everything warm. Kara came by that evening, bringing soup and a power strip and that dry kind of humor only best friends can pull off when things feel unbearable. She didn't say much at first, just helped me out of bed, rubbed my back when I winced, and sat on the edge of the couch, eating a granola bar like it was any other Tuesday. Eventually, I told her what happened. I told her everything. And she just nodded, then said, "Rachel, I love you, but your parents are assholes." I didn't even argue. Because she wasn't wrong. And hearing it out loud made it real in a way that texts and voicemails never could. What they didn't realize, what they never realized, was that this wasn't about a damn vacation. It was about the years before it. The years they spent dismissing my needs, brushing off my pain, rewarding Amanda's chaos with attention and gifts while treating my independence like it was a personality flaw. When Amanda totaled her car at 19, they bought her another one so she wouldn't feel punished. When I got accepted to a college out of state on partial scholarship, they said it was too far and too expensive and maybe I should just stay local. I did. I always did. I played it safe. I didn't ask for much. And somehow, that made me easier to forget. But this time, I wasn't going to let them forget. I didn't start out thinking about revenge. It wasn't that calculated, not at first. It was more like a slow boil, the kind that simmers beneath the surface until the lid starts rattling. I couldn't stop thinking about what they said. Not what they meant. Not what they tried to backpedal into later. Just those exact words, "You would have slowed us down." They said it like I was a chore, like my recovery was a speed bump on their joyride. And I kept wondering, what kind of parents say that to their child? What kind of people? The next morning, I picked up my phone and started scrolling, not through social media, not through photos of their tan faces and Amanda's bikini shots, but through my cloud backups. I looked at all the notes I had written over the years, the texts I had never sent, the drafts of emails I typed and saved, but never had the nerve to send. There were more than I remembered. Pages and pages of things I had swallowed, silences I had let grow like mold inside my chest. I read them all. And then I opened a new one. It was titled Things You Never Noticed. And as I typed, I started to remember every single moment they made me feel like background noise to Amanda's spotlight. I didn't know yet what I was going to do with it. I just knew one thing for certain: when they got back from their luxury escape, when they finally stepped foot back into the house they called home, they wouldn't find the same daughter they'd left behind. Because I wasn't going to be there. But I would leave them something they'd never forget. By the third day of their trip, while my parents were likely being served cocktails by a man in a white linen shirt and Amanda was probably posing for selfies against a background of ocean blues and palm tree silhouettes, I was finally able to get up and walk the short distance from my bedroom to the kitchen without gripping the wall like a drunk learning to walk again. The pain wasn't just physical anymore. It had begun to settle in my bones, in my breath, in the space behind my eyes where every painful memory from the past seemed to take root and bloom all at once. I wasn't angry at them in a loud, fiery way. It wasn't rage, at least not yet. It was a colder thing, sharp, clear, almost surgical. Like something inside me had turned off, and in that silence, I saw everything with a clarity that made it hard to swallow. I think what hurt most wasn't that they left. It wasn't even that they went on vacation without telling me until they were already at the airport. No, what truly gutted me, what pulled at something ancient in my chest, was the ease with which they made that decision. No hesitation. No guilt. Just smooth, practiced indifference. As if they'd been waiting for an excuse to exclude me. As if it was almost a relief not to have to include me in anything at all. And what made it all worse, what twisted the knife in a way only family can, was the fact that Amanda had known. She had known about the surgery. I had texted her, not because I expected support, but because I still clung to some last, fragile thread of hope that maybe, just maybe, she'd surprise me. That maybe under the layers of narcissism and curated Instagram humility, there was still a sister who remembered the nights we used to build forts under the dining room table and pretend we were explorers in a world where parents didn't pick favorites. But she responded with a thumbs-up emoji and then went silent for 3 days. And now, there she was, in photo after photo, living the life of the beloved daughter while I sat alone with my pain and my silence and the cold realization that my absence hadn't even been noticed, let alone mourned. I opened my laptop and logged into the security cameras at the house, not because I wanted to spy, but because I needed proof that what I felt was real, that this wasn't just a dramatic spiral brought on by painkillers and abandonment. And there they were, laughing in the hotel suite, sitting by the pool, posing for some resort photographer like a family with nothing to hide. Amanda showed off her tan lines and her new bathing suit in the mirror, while Mom adjusted her floppy hat and Dad complained about the buffet lines. There was no space in that image for me. No pause in their conversations that indicated anything was missing. It was like I had never existed. Kara came over again that night. She brought tacos and that familiar expression of cautious concern that told me she was trying not to say too much too soon. She knew me well enough to let the silence stretch until I filled it myself. I told her about the cameras. I told her about the text messages and the photos and the way my mom signed her name with hearts next to Amanda's in every post, but didn't even mention me once. I told her about the time in high school when I won a statewide art competition and no one came to the ceremony because Amanda had a minor cold and they didn't want to leave her alone. I told her about the scholarship I turned down because they said it wasn't practical and the way they clapped louder for Amanda's community college certificate than they ever did for my actual degree. And Kara, bless her brutal honesty, didn't flinch. She listened, really listened, the way you only do when you're witnessing someone else begin to come to terms with something they've been avoiding for years. And then she said, "You're not just leaving, are you?" And I didn't answer right away, because the truth was still taking shape in my mind like a bruise forming under the skin, dark, slow, and certain. When I finally looked up, I met her eyes and said, "No. I'm making a statement." It wasn't enough to walk away quietly. That's what I had done my whole life. Bit my tongue, swallowed the hurt, kept the peace, let Amanda shine while I stood just out of frame, hoping someone might turn the camera toward me. But they never did. They never would. And now I wasn't going to give them the comfort of an invisible exit. I wanted them to feel it. To feel the weight of my absence the same way I had felt the weight of their indifference for years. I wanted it to echo in their perfectly decorated house, in the empty chair at the dinner table, in every room where my voice used to be just soft enough to ignore. That night, I started making a list. I didn't know what I'd do with it yet, but I knew I needed to write it all down, every slight, every forgotten birthday, every time they called me too sensitive when I was just asking to be seen. It started with the big moments, missed graduations, canceled plans, ignored hospital visits. But then the little ones came flooding in, too, Mom cutting Amanda's sandwiches into hearts, but handing mine over in plastic wrap, Dad teaching Amanda to drive, but telling me to figure it out when I asked. The Christmas they forgot to buy me a gift, but gave Amanda an envelope of cash with a note that said, "Just because." All of it. I wrote until my fingers cramped and my chest ached with the kind of pain that no medication could touch. I didn't cry. Not once. The crying had been done long ago, in a bedroom with a broken lamp and posters peeling from the wall, back when I still believed they might change. What I felt now wasn't grief. It was strategy. It was precision. It was a calmness I hadn't known I was capable of. Because for the first time, I wasn't just surviving them, I was preparing to outgrow them completely. Not in anger. Not in drama. But in silence so loud it would rattle the walls. And they would hear it. They just didn't know it yet. By the time their return flight was listed on the tracker and I saw the little plane icon floating over the Gulf of Mexico heading back toward Illinois, I had already cleared the last of my things out of the house, not with dramatic flair or frantic packing, but methodically, almost clinically, the way you might disassemble something that never quite worked right in the first place, each drawer opened with deliberation, each closet purged of whatever pieces of me I had once left behind, all of it sorted, boxed, and taken away in silence, as if erasing my own footprints from a house that had never truly been a home. I didn't need much, really, because I had never been allowed to make too much space there. My things were always secondary. Amanda's framed certificates lined the hallway, Amanda's childhood paintings still hung in the stairwell, and in the living room, the family photo on the mantel showed the four of us standing shoulder to shoulder, with me positioned slightly off to the side like I had been photoshopped in as an afterthought. I didn't take that photo when I left. I took the frame, but left the empty glass rectangle on the mantel, just slightly crooked, just enough to be noticed, but not enough to be immediately understood. It was one of many choices I made that day, not destructive, not violent, but intentional in that quietly devastating way that forces people to sit in the echo of what's been taken, not because it was stolen, but because it was never truly appreciated while it was there. I wanted them to notice, and more importantly, I wanted them to ask themselves why. I taped an envelope to the fridge, dead center, just below the magnet Amanda brought back from her Cancun trip 3 years ago. The envelope was plain, sealed, unmarked except for a single line on the front in my handwriting. "Thanks for making it easy to leave." Inside, I had folded a letter, typed, not handwritten, because I didn't want the ink to smudge or the message to be softened by cursive loops and nostalgia. The letter didn't accuse. It documented. 3 pages of timestamps, quotes, dates, and moments I remembered vividly, and they probably forgot entirely, because that's the thing about neglect, it's not always active cruelty, it's sometimes just the constant absence of care. And for the person living through it, every instance is a pinprick, but to the ones who cause it, it's nothing more than a shrug or an excuse. On the kitchen counter, I left a manila folder. Inside was a printed list, clean, bullet-pointed, unembellished, of every major milestone of mine they had missed or minimized. From my first art show that they skipped because Amanda had a last-minute breakdown, to my college acceptance letter that was met with a lukewarm, "That's nice," to the time I called them crying after a breakup and was told to try yoga, it was all there. Each entry brief, but precise, each memory carved into words sharp enough to draw blood, if handled without care. I didn't leave that list for them to argue with. I left it because I wanted the record to exist, to be undeniable, to be real in a way my voice never quite was when I said it out loud. Before I walked out, I changed the locks, not out of spite, but because the apartment I had found, small though it was, represented something I'd never been given in that house: choice. I had chosen the neighborhood. I had chosen the ugly but solid couch from Facebook Marketplace. I had chosen the smell of lemongrass candles and the blue ceramic dishes and the drawer full of herbal teas I would never have to justify drinking instead of wine. And maybe it wasn't perfect. Maybe the heating creaked and the upstairs neighbor vacuumed at midnight. But it was mine. And no one could take it away with a guilt trip or a passive-aggressive remark. That same day, I scheduled an email through a delayed delivery system. I timed it to send at 7:15 p.m., the exact time their plane was due to land. The email went out to my parents, Amanda, and a handful of extended family members, people who had always seen the smiling Christmas card version of our family and never the behind-the-scenes footage. I didn't dramatize the message. I simply wrote, "I'm not missing. I've just removed myself from a place that made me feel invisible for too long. If you're surprised, then you weren't paying attention." This was never about one vacation. It was about a lifetime of being optional. I ended it with a line that had lived in the back of my throat for over a decade: loving someone only counts if they feel it. What came next wasn't rage or sadness. It was silence. Which, ironically, was the most poetic kind of justice. Because silence was the thing they had given me all my life, their selective listening, their polite nods, their avoidance of conflict that always left me feeling like the problem simply for having feelings at all. And now, they would feel it returned, not as a scream, but as an absence. Not as a goodbye, but as a removal. Clean. Final. Absolute. Amanda, predictably, posted a new photo that evening, standing in front of a mirror with her skin still glowing from the sun and a cocktail in her hand, captioned, "Home sweet home. Best trip ever. Love my family so much it hurts." I stared at the screen for a few seconds before clicking the comment box. I didn't say anything cruel. I didn't rant. I just typed, "Not all family gets an invite. Some just get left behind," and hit post. Within minutes, the comment was deleted and my profile was blocked. It was the most honest exchange Amanda and I had ever had. And that was when I knew I had done it right, not because I had hurt them, but because they had reacted. Because something had cracked open. Because for the first time, they were being forced to look at the empty seat at the table and ask themselves how it got that way. I had left no forwarding address, no voicemail, no breadcrumbs. I had, for once in my life, become the question they couldn't answer. And for them, that would be the beginning of the real punishment. When their plane finally touched down and the weight of jet lag began to press down on their sun-kissed shoulders, I imagine they felt the soft pull of routine wrapping itself around them again, the familiar hum of suburban life, the comforting predictability of their well-manicured home, the knowledge that their trip had ended without disruption, without delay, and without the messy complications of guilt or obligation. I like to think that, at least for the first few minutes, they were still carrying that blissful smugness of the well-rested and the self-satisfied, exchanging laughs in the back seat of the Uber. Their luggage clinking with the sound of duty-free rum and souvenirs wrapped in tissue paper, and maybe, just maybe, Amanda was already scrolling through her camera roll, picking which filtered beach photo would become her next post, entirely unaware that the version of their home they were returning had changed in a way that no amount of scented candles or throw pillows could conceal. I don't know what they noticed first. Maybe it was the missing coat on the hook in the foyer, or the sudden emptiness of the second bedroom that had quietly been mine for 32 years. Maybe it was the subtle shift in the air, the absence of my shoes by the door, the lack of keys in the dish, the way my presence had always hovered like a draft they'd learned to ignore. I suspect it was the note on the fridge that brought it all crashing into focus. The envelope taped right in the center, no longer camouflaged by magnets or grocery lists, with those 11 words I had typed out and printed not because I didn't want to write them by hand, but because I wanted them to feel sterile, precise, and intentional. Thanks for making it easy to leave. No greeting. No signature. Just clarity. Just finality. Just that. They must have opened it. Of course they did. And inside, they would have found my letter, 3 pages of quiet reckoning, stripped of emotion, designed not to explain but to expose. And beside it, the list. The tally. The timeline of absence and disappointment. I didn't include commentary, only facts, dates, quotes, memory sharp enough to prick even through their years of practiced indifference. I imagine my mother read the first few lines with that tight-lipped expression she always used when confronted with anything that didn't align with her curated version of family, the expression that said she was offended by your pain, not because it hurt her, but because it inconvenienced her narrative. My father, if I know him, probably stood in silence, blinking slowly, then muttered something about me being too sensitive or overthinking everything before retreating to the garage to let the moment pass like all others. Amanda didn't reach out. She didn't call, didn't text, didn't send some carefully worded message pretending to be shocked or hurt. She went quiet, radio silent, the way she always had when confronted with anything that wasn't about her. I assume she read the email I sent, and I have no doubt she dismissed it as dramatic or selfish, perhaps even manipulative, because Amanda's world had always been made of mirrors angled toward her, and any reflection that didn't flatter was simply ignored. But even she, with all her self-absorption and curated performances, must have felt the sting of public silence when, for the first time, my absence became visible not only to them, but to others. The email reached more than just our little family bubble. It reached my aunt in Wisconsin, who always sent cards late, my cousin Brian, who had no idea I'd ever been hospitalized, even a few old neighbors who had been fooled for years by our holiday decorations and matching sweaters. And slowly, subtly, the questions began to trickle in, not to me, of course, because I had already stepped off that stage, but to them, the ones left behind to answer. I heard through Kara, who remained my only tether to that old world, that people were beginning to ask what happened, why I had left, why no one had seen me, and why no one had known about the surgery. My mother told one person I needed space. She told another that I was going through something personal. She spun her stories like a spider clinging to the corners of a collapsing web, never admitting that the real issue wasn't a sudden change, but a long, quiet buildup of things ignored for too long. My father sent me a single text 3 days after their return. It read, "We were surprised to come home and find you gone. You could have talked to us instead of doing this." I stared at the message for a long time, rereading that sentence until the bitterness in it settled into something colder. Instead of doing this. As though the problem wasn't their neglect, but my refusal to continue tolerating it. As though the only betrayal that mattered was mine, not the 32 years of theirs, parceled out in small, deniable cruelties that accumulated until they formed a wall I could no longer scale. I didn't reply. Not because I had nothing to say, but because he had already made it clear he wasn't really asking. He was just lobbing the ball back into my court, hoping I'd pick it up, apologize, and resume the game. But this wasn't a game anymore. It wasn't a phase, or a tantrum, or a cry for attention. It was an ending. And what they couldn't comprehend, what people like them rarely do, is that sometimes endings aren't loud. They don't always come with shouting matches or broken plates. Sometimes they arrive in the form of silence, of absence, of a door that closes softly and doesn't open again, no matter how long you knock. And for the first time, they had to sit in the discomfort of not knowing what would come next. Kara came over that weekend, bringing wine and bad takeout and a look on her face that told me she had heard the latest ripple of fallout. She said my mom had called her, voice tight and brittle, asking if I was okay, where I was, if I had lost my mind. Kara told her, calmly, that I was fine, that I was healing, and that no, I wasn't interested in talking. When my mom asked, "Does she hate us?" Kara didn't answer. She just let the silence stretch until it filled the space between them like a fog too thick to see through. And in that silence, I think my mother heard, Maybe for the first time, what I had been saying all along, not with words, but with distance. There was a shift after that. A slow, awkward stumbling of people trying to pretend things were normal. Amanda posted more photos, as if to prove nothing had changed. My father sent me 2 articles about the benefits of forgiveness, and my mother left a voicemail where she cried for 5 seconds, then caught herself and said, "Anyway, just call us, okay?" I didn't return the call. I didn't respond to the messages. Because nothing they said, not a single word, had acknowledged what they'd done, only what I'd done in response. They were mourning the loss of control, not the loss of me. And I wanted them to sit in that grief, because I had sat in mine for years. And now it was their turn. Months passed, slowly at first, in that unfamiliar rhythm that comes when you sever something deep, something foundational, and find yourself floating in a space that feels both terrifying and oddly peaceful, like stepping into a quiet house after years of background noise and realizing the silence isn't empty, it's freedom. I had always assumed, in the small, hopeful part of me that refused to die completely, that there would be a moment of regret on their end, a kind of awakening, where they'd look around, notice the empty chair, the missing voice, the void I left behind, and feel it not just as a discomfort, but as a loss. But regret, I learned, is a rare and inconvenient emotion for people who have built their identities on being blameless, and instead of remorse, what I received was spin. Carefully crafted narratives designed to reframe my departure not as the result of their behavior, but as evidence of mine. Amanda, ever the self-curator, told mutual family members and old friends that I had gone through something and just needed time, spinning my absence into a vague, digestible story that didn't require anyone to look too closely at her own role or examine the brittle edges of the truth. She even suggested, in one passive-aggressive group message I was not supposed to see but which Kara forwarded to me with a grim little smile, that I had always been emotionally volatile, and that it was probably for the best that I had distanced myself. Until I was better. That word, better, clung to me like static. Better than what? Better than the daughter who never screamed but always felt too much? Better than the sister who didn't pretend everything was fine just because it looked fine in photographs? It wasn't just dishonest, it was insulting, because it reinforced the very pattern that had led me to leave in the first place, their insistence on rewriting my reality into something easier for them to accept. But I didn't correct her. I didn't chase down the falsehoods or issue clarifications or defend myself against their polished fiction, because I had finally reached a place, mentally and emotionally, where I understood that proving the truth to people who are committed to denying it is not only exhausting, it's pointless. Let them tell their version. Let them believe it. Let them offer it to others like a neatly wrapped gift that says, "We're the good ones, she's just troubled." Because I didn't need their acknowledgement anymore. What I needed was distance. What I needed was peace. And, for the first time, I had both. In my new apartment, far from the neighborhood where I had spent most of my life playing the part of the low-maintenance daughter, I built something that wasn't spectacular or enviable or worth photographing, but which was finally mine, quiet, small. Slightly chaotic in its own way, filled with mismatched furniture and late-night music and the scent of coffee that lingered into the afternoon. Kara visited often, sometimes staying until midnight, sitting on the floor with her socks half off, reading aloud old messages from her exes or debating whether she should finally get a cat. We didn't talk about my family much anymore. Not because the pain had vanished, but because it no longer ruled the room. It was just a shadow now present, but no longer the center. I learned how to be alone in a new way. Not lonely. Not abandoned. Just present with myself. I took long walks without headphones. I started painting again, not to impress anyone, but just to remember what it felt like to make something without judgment. I got a part-time job at a bookstore and began reconnecting with people who remembered me as more than Amanda's older sister or Jack and Linda's quiet one. People who didn't ask about the surgery or the fallout or the silence, but who saw me as I was in that moment, alive, changing, slowly healing. But the absence I left behind? That was doing its own quiet work. My aunt emailed me. Short, polite, cautious. She said, "I don't know what happened, and I won't ask, but I just want you to know I'm here if you ever need someone who listens." I didn't reply. Not because I didn't appreciate it, but because I wasn't ready. Still, I saved the email. Read it 3 times. Let it sit like a note tucked under a door from someone who was finally willing to knock instead of barge in. Kara told me that Amanda got engaged. Big ring, big announcement, big Instagram rollout. I wasn't invited, of course. Not to the engagement dinner, not to the bridal shower, not to any of it. But it didn't sting like I expected it to. If anything, I felt relief, clean, unmistakable relief, that I didn't have to smile through another evening of pretending we were something we weren't. I spent that weekend at a cousin's wedding instead, one who had quietly messaged me weeks earlier, asking if I'd come because it wouldn't feel right without you. That night, I posted a photo. Not for drama. Not as a statement. Just a moment of truth, me, standing under string lights, laughing mid-sentence, surrounded by people who had chosen me, not out of obligation, but out of something real. The caption read, "Finally around real family." No names. No tags. Just that. I heard later that Amanda saw it. That she showed our parents, that they sat in silence after reading it, each one thinking their own thoughts, but none of them saying what mattered. That silence, I think, was louder than anything I could have screamed. And that silence has stayed with them. Sometimes I wonder if they talk about me now, if, when they sit down to dinner or decorate the house for the holidays, they notice the empty place where my voice used to be, and if it aches in them the way their absence once ached in me. I wonder if my mother still scrolls through old texts, searching for something she missed, a sign she might have seen earlier if she'd been paying attention. I wonder if my father still tells himself that he did his best, even though, deep down, he knows he never really tried to understand me. I wonder if Amanda, ever the golden child, ever feels a crack in her confidence when she realizes that no one's there to mirror her light anymore. But the truth is, I don't need those answers. Because some wounds don't get stitched up with apologies or explanations. Some wounds only begin to heal when you walk away and never return. And the absence you leave behind, when it's honest, when it's earned, when it's the result of finally choosing yourself after a lifetime of being told you didn't matter, can be louder, deeper, and more lasting than any fight, any letter, or any tear-filled goodbye. Some people say forgiveness is freedom. Maybe that's true for them. But for me, freedom came not from forgiving, not from forgetting, but from finally allowing my absence to speak louder than my presence ever did, and knowing, without question, that this time, they heard it.